Good morning, everyone. So glad that you're here this morning. I want to start adding my thanks to what Joel said for Minister Appreciation Day last week. The notes were so encouraging and the comments, and thank you for that. I have to admit, it always feels a little awkward because Joel and I get honored during that day, and that's a great thing, but also Joel and I are the ones that are up front the most, but there are so many other people who make what happens at this church go that it feels a little awkward to get that recognition when there's so many other folks. And so to our worship leaders, to the praise team, and Paula, who just does a fantastic job leading that group, to Kim and Melissa and Brooke and Crystal, and the other ministry staff here at this church. They are so fantastic and help us out. And then there's just so many other people who volunteer, who pray, who read scripture, who do communion service, who make announcements, who teach Sunday school classes, lead life groups, host life groups. There's so many people in this church and in this room that make what we do go. And so I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who do that. You are honored as well. Also, as Dana said, I don't know if you could hear her through the tears, but her dad is here today, my father-in-law. His name is Danny, so you can see where Dana got her name. And he's sitting back there with her. And so if you get a chance to meet him after church, that's awesome. He's been a mentor in ministry to me. I've asked him so many questions about Scripture. It's a little intimidating to preach in front of him because of that, but I'm so glad he's here. He's going to be with us through the Thanksgiving break. And anyway, glad you're here, Dan. Looking forward to the food and folks and fun that's coming this week. Thanksgiving is a great time. It's actually my favorite holiday. And you people who already have your Christmas decorations up, you're all sick. So just kidding. Do what you want. Do what you want. But I want you to know that I am going to enjoy Thanksgiving before I start thinking about Christmas. We've been on a series called The Cruciform Life, and the Cruciform Life is about becoming your true self. What Jung called your most authentic self. And Richard Rohr says that the only way you can find your true authentic self is in union with God. That who you are in union with God is the person that you were meant to be, the person that you were made to be. So the Cruciform Life is bringing the different parts of your life into alignment. And we talked last week about how just absolutely compartmentalized our life gets, and if we're not careful, our church life and our school life and our work life and our friends' life and our family life, they don't align, and we become unaligned in the way we think through life, and we become different people in different places. And one of the calls to the Cruciform Life is to become more aligned and put everything in the faith thing. That there's no other container that's meant to hold all of your stuff, but this life of faith is meant to hold all of our stuff. And so the part of that is knowing what you add into the faith life, but part of that is knowing what you cut away. Those things that you need to cut out of your life to keep moving in a life of faith. I saw a video this week on pirates. It's things you never knew about pirates. Now, you guys know I'm a history guy, and I perk up when I see things like this. And the entire time I was watching the video, I could not get over just how clever pirates are, or were. They were so clever. And I know a lot of you may only have like the Pirates of the Caribbean movie to go on, but they were just so clever in the way they interacted with people. For example, if they were coming on another ship, they didn't want that ship to get scared off and run. So what they would do is they would put a flag of a different country up. It's where we get the term false flag. They'd put a flag of a different country up, and they get close enough to the boat to where once the boat was so close they couldn't run, then they would put up the pirate flag, the skull and crossbones, the Jolly Rogers. But they would also drape these brown sheets, canvases over their ship that looked like wood from far off, so people couldn't tell how many cannons they are. And so I realized while I was watching it that pirates understood more about branding and imaging before that was ever popular in this world. They just understood it. Other things, they were almost completely democratic. The pirates captains were voted on by the men. They could be voted out. It was democracy before democracy had taken hold in our country. They had black and indigenous pirates, and even would be elected captain. They were inclusive before that was ever popular in our country. They had an economic system of having equal shares, and was very progressive for its time. Even the eye patch, I don't know if you know this, but you see the stereotypical eye patch. It turns out that was mostly not about someone getting their eye poked out and wearing an eye patch. What it was is they would, in these fights, they would fight below deck and above deck, and so they wanted to keep one eye acclimated to the dark and one eye acclimated to the light at all times. And so once they were below deck, they'd just switch it over. And once they were above deck, they'd switch it back so they could stay acclimated and be better fighters. And as I was watching the video, I just thought, they are so clever. It's so clever, and it really makes you think. They are so clever that you think they could have found a way to make a living without the murder and stealing. Like, you feel like they could have figured something out to do that was more productive than what they were doing. I feel the same way about some of the scam artists today. Well, Dana and I were in Key West one time. Someone figured out a way to port our phones over to a different company and then start mining our information for all our passwords to steal money from us. And it's something that, since we still have Memphis phones, it's something that happened in Memphis. And when I talked to the police officer about it, and heard how they did it, I just thought, those people are so smart. They're so smart. Like, the way they did it is so smart. And I kept thinking, if they're that smart, they could get a real job, right? They could figure something productive to do in society that would just help other people and not hurt other people and not give me 2 months of a nightmare trying to get all my phone stuff back over to AT&T. And all of that made me think about the time when I was in school and I was in a little bit of trouble, and the dean of students called me in and he said, "George, you're just too smart for this. You're too smart for this." And I remember thinking, it's easy to say you're too smart for something if that's not the thing you're struggling with, right? It's easy to say you're too smart for this if it's not what you struggle with. It's easy for someone who's thin to look at someone and say, that person just needs to work out, because that's not something they struggle with. It's easy for someone who's from a middle or upper class to look at someone who's struggling with homelessness and just think, oh, those people need to get a job. They just need to go get a job. It's easy for people who have never struggled with substances or substance abuse to look at someone and just think, that person just needs to quit drinking. They just need to stop drinking. It's easy to look at other people and see the things they need to cut out of their life, but it's not so easy when it's our life, right? It's not so easy to see the things that we need to cut out of our life, because those are the things we struggle with. And sometimes by pointing out the things that other people struggle with, it feels like it lessens a little bit the things that we struggle with. So I have to tell you that when I go through this lesson on cutting out, one of the people in the room that needs to find some stuff to cut out of their life is me. That this is not about what you need to do. This is about what we need to do. We all have disordered attachments. We all have these things in our lives where they're holding us back from God, and whether they're a disordered attachment or a sin or even an idol or an addiction, we all have those things, and we need to listen. It's so easy to listen to a sermon and think about all the people in the room who need to hear exactly what was just said and never consider the fact that maybe we all need to hear it. And there's something in my life that needs to change as well. So this morning as we listen, let's listen from within, and let's listen to our own hearts and the Spirit within us and what God is calling us to change. Now, last week I said that a disordered attachment is anything that is keeping you from faith, hope, and love, is keeping you from God, or has the potential to do that. And that they're not always sin, and they're not always idols, and they're not always addictions, but they have the potential to become all of that. It's something that we care a little too much about for it to be consistent with who we are trying to be in God and in faith. Now, another word for that is entanglement. And Scripture uses an interesting metaphor for entanglement, although I didn't catch it for a long time. This is from Matthew 4, 18 through 20, and it's the call of the original disciples. It says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and they followed him. Now, when they left their nets, they not only left those things that would help them entangle fish and catch fish, but they also left the things that would keep them from following God. The nets become this metaphor of the thing that would be holding them back from fully committing to following Jesus. And it's a neat metaphor that I think the reasonable thing for them to do, if they were talking to their parents first and they said, what's the reasonable thing for them to for us to do? Their parents would say, well, I think you should follow him, but I think you should probably hold on to your nets too. The reasonable thing would be hold on to the nets while try to follow Jesus at the same time, but Jesus was calling them to be something deeper than that. He was calling them to fully commit to the story that God is telling. So the passage that Dan read this morning, I honestly think it's one of the hardest passages in all of Scripture to talk about because it almost feels like Jesus is being unkind. It almost feels like Jesus is saying, don't go to your dad's funeral. Don't go say bye to your parents. It feels like he's being harsh, and you just think when you read it, really, Jesus? Is that really what you want us to do? And it's difficult not to feel like Jesus is being unreasonable in this moment. But I want us to remember that there's something bigger going on. If you back up just a few verses in Luke 9, 43 and 44, it says this. While everyone was marveling at what Jesus did, he said to his disciples, listen carefully to what I am about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. Where he was going was to his death. Jesus was on his way to be delivered into the hands of men. So this was no time for half-hearted discipleship. This was no time for someone to say, I love you and I want to follow you, but. It was becoming the time in Jesus' ministry where it was put up or shut up. That Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He was going to cause a stir. He was going to be very disruptive in the temple. People were going to plot and eventually kill him. And then the disciples were going to have to make some hard choices. He knew the kind of discipleship these folks were being called to. And what he was saying is, you can't follow me while wishing you were somewhere else. So Jesus comes into contact with three people during this passage that was read. The first one is, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said, really? Anywhere? Anywhere I go? Because the place I'm going isn't easy. You're not going to have a lot of comforts. And I feel like the disordered attachment in the story is comfort. That this person was wanting to follow Jesus while still being comfortable, and Jesus was saying that that's not the story that you're committing to. If you commit to me, you're committing to being uncomfortable. You're committing to being disregarded, to being people not appreciating what you do, not having a lot of places to go and a lot of places to stay. Jesus explains that following him means living a life of discomfort. And you see examples of this all around. After our series on evangelism, one of our members told me that they talked to one of their supervisors for the first time about their faith and even invited them to a Bible study. Now, that's not a comfortable thing to do. I don't know if you've ever tried that. That's not a comfortable thing to do, but they were praying after the evangelism series to be bold, and that's something they felt like the Spirit of God leading them to do. That's uncomfortable. You see it in what our teens are doing in the Alpha training on Wednesday nights. And if you remember, Alpha is about inviting your friends and giving them a chance to hear the gospel and hear the story of God. And watching their Wednesday nights and seeing some of their friends walk up, it's so inspirational what they're doing to invite their friends to come hear the story of God. And one or two of them have even said, I invited someone, but they didn't come. And that's the way it goes, right? That it's not our job to manage the results or control the results. It's our job to plant seeds. We want to plant trees and see how God provides the increase and the growth. And so just appreciate their willingness to get out of their comfort zone. I was talking to one of our other members who said that the blessing bags that we do and pass out gave them the courage for the first time to talk to someone who's experiencing homelessness, and that was uncomfortable for them, but they wanted to do that. And I was so inspired by just people who are constantly trying to get out of their comfort zone to engage. There are missionaries who have done the same thing. I know some missionaries who, when they decided where they were going, almost everyone in their life, including their family, were saying, that's crazy. Why are you taking your kids to that mission field? And they just continually felt the call of God moving them into doing something like that, and had a beautiful experience at the same time. Not everyone is called to the big discomforts. Not everyone is called to be missionaries, but we're all called to get out of our comfort zone as we serve God. This thing that we're doing in February, Night to Shine, that Dana talked about. I have to tell you, the first time I did it, I wasn't super comfortable. But after being there for 10 minutes, it may be the most fun I've ever had doing anything. And it's a prom for kids experiencing special needs. And I'm not a great dancer, but dancing at that prom was so much fun with those kids because it just came out of joy and love, and to see them being the light of God being shared with those people. And our life is not about comfort. Our life is about following God, following Jesus wherever Jesus goes, and laying aside that comfort. The second person Jesus came in contact with said, let me return home to bury my father. And Jesus said, well, let the dead bury the dead. Let the dead bury the dead. And again, this seems harsh and unfeeling until you start to read some of the background behind this. And one of the fascinating things about the story is that most scholars believe that his dad probably wasn't dead. His dad wasn't dead yet. The way this was worded, and you can think this through the prodigal son, it's kind of a similar story. What he was actually saying was, I want to follow you, but I want to wait till my dad passes away and I can get my inheritance, and so I don't have to worry about money when I'm following you, is what he said. And so the second disordered attachment in this story is security. That he wanted security before he felt comfortable stepping out and following Jesus. Security is a disordered attachment that leads to other disordered attachments. If you have a disordered attachment about money, there's a chance that disordered attachment is really about security and the security money feels. And even people who struggle with substance abuse, there's so much about that is about not feeling comfortable in a situation and wanting to escape either a space or a mental head space. And so they use substances to keep to get out of that space. And that is about security and feeling safe and secure. And the second person Jesus comes in contact with, he wanted to follow Jesus, just not today. Just not today. It's like the person who's always going to start their diet tomorrow, right? Or this week, it's the day after Thanksgiving. We have this idea of we want to do what we want to do, but we just want to wait until the time is right. This is contrasted by stories in Scripture like the Ethiopian eunuch when he came upon water and he said, oh, look, here's water. What keeps me from being baptized? And the answer was nothing. Nothing, that there's an urgency to our story, that there's nothing that's holding us back, and that there's no reason to wait. There's no reason to say to Jesus, I want to wait and follow you later when things are a little more settled. The best time to start is right now, today. The third person says, First, let me go and say goodbye to my family. And Jesus' response was, don't look back. You can't follow me looking backwards. And the disordered attachment in this part of the story is family. Now, I want to be very careful how I talk about that this morning because my father-in-law is here. But he was in ministry long enough that I guarantee you, I hadn't even talked to him about this, but I guarantee you he studied with someone or baptized someone that them making a significant decision to follow Jesus caused some problems in their family. That there are times when it is our family that's holding us back from following God as closely as we would like. This is tricky because it deals with what do we do when following God means going up against the family that we love so much. And we have to make some hard decisions about that. And it's hard because we have to do what's spiritually best for us, what's spiritually best for our family, even in the face of criticism sometimes. We all know people whose family disowned them when they made a serious commitment for Christ or to leave the tradition that they grew up in. And I know several people in my life like that. And it takes a special kind of courage to stand up to your family in those moments. When I was a youth minister, very first few years I was ever a youth minister, I had this kid in my youth group, and he was a member of he went to school at like a charter magnet school for engineering. Super smart. And his parents were so excited about what he wanted to become until they heard that he wanted to become a youth minister. Then they were not as excited. And during his 11th and beginning of his 12th grade year, there were some hard conversations about how they wanted him to go to engineering school and he wanted to go to a Christian school to become a youth minister. And I remember walking with his dad, and his dad was talking to me about it, and his dad said to me, I just thought he would be so much more. And he said that to his youth minister. And I just stopped and I said, all right, I don't want to get in the middle of your family stuff, but listen to what you just said and who you just said it to. And he goes, I know. And it was a difficult conversation. You know, the end of the story is the kid ended up going to Harding University, became a youth minister. His parents finally got on board with it, and it became a healthier part of that relationship. But it just makes me think there are times when we have to step out of what our family had planned for us and do the hard thing that God is calling us to do. And I know there's people who have a hard time doing that, and trust me, there's no judgment in all this and love, that we kind of all have to go at the pace that we go in. But I want everyone to understand that there's always going to be people, there's always going to be situations in life, there's always going to be disordered attachments that are trying to hold us back from following Jesus. And part of our job is to learn how to cut away those things that are holding us back so we can fully commit to Jesus Christ. You can't be where you're meant to be. You can't be your authentic self until you're fully committed. You can't be where you want to be while wishing you were somewhere else. And so this morning I want to ask you, what are your disordered attachments? What are your idols? What is the sin in your life that you need to cut away? What are some of the things, the addictions that you need to move past? Truth is, I think I know what they are for some of you, but I don't want to think about what they are for me. I know that I've held on to some of my disordered attachments so tightly that they've become a problem for me. I had a science teacher in the 8th grade who had this machine. It's a little desktop machine, and it had electricity hooked up to it, and it had these nodes, these little bar things that you held on to, and then they run the electricity through them so much that your hands clamped down, and you couldn't get your hands off the little bars that they gave you. And they just do it right there in science class without a permission slip or anything. Like the 80s were wild. And I just remember holding on to that thing and him turning the electricity up. And I thought I was a pretty strong kid, and no matter what I did, I couldn't let go of it until they turned the electricity down. I remember one of my friends trying to pry my fingers away and just held on so tightly. And that's the way it goes with the things we struggle with. We hold on to them so tightly that we can't let go sometimes. And we start out these things where they're a matter of self-control, and I have all the freedom in the world to do what I want to do. And then once you're addicted to something, it's no longer about freedom. Once you have a disordered attachment that's gotten in there and entangled your life, it's not about freedom anymore. I don't know many people who are controlled by something who actually love the thing they're controlled by. It eventually becomes a prison or restraints or nets that hold you back. We feel like we have this full freedom of choice, but eventually it becomes about the lack of freedom and being tied into something. Jesus talks about this on the Sermon on the Mount, and I think if the other verse that was read is one of the harder verses in Scripture, I think this one is almost as hard. This is Matthew 5:29 through 30, and he says this: "If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better that you lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go to hell." I don't like this passage, right? I don't like Jesus talking about cutting off body parts, especially because if you look at the few verses before, he's actually talking about lust. And this doesn't feel comfortable for us to talk about cutting off body parts. But I want to keep a couple things in mind. One is that Jesus is using hyperbole when it comes to this. I fully believe that Jesus does not mean for anybody to cut off any body parts. That this is about him being hyperbolic and saying, take those things that are holding you back. It's more important for you to cut it away than it is for you to hold on to it so tightly that it keeps you trapped. It doesn't sound great. And the second thing is that what you experience when you're able to cut it away is freedom. Like sometimes cutting those things out of your life is difficult, it's violence, it's hard, but what you experience is freedom. That's one of the things that our friends at AA has taught us, that when you're able to set yourself free from those things that are holding you back, it feels like freedom. I didn't understand this until I read a book by the name of Aaron Ralston called A Rock and a Hard Place. Aaron Ralston was hiking out in Utah. He's solo hiking through this valley. And this valley, as you can see a part of it on a picture on the right, it's about 2 feet wide, and it went about 200 feet up on each side. And as he was walking, there was a boulder that was in the path stuck between the two spaces. And so he decided he was going to hop on top of the boulder and hop over it. And when he did the first step, the boulder rolled backwards, and he put his hand down to steady his fall, and the rock rolled over his hand and pinned him there in the valley while he was solo hiking. And he was stuck. And he had very little food and water. It was just a day hike. And nobody came to rescue him. He was there for 5 days. And he realized that he was going to perish there. He even wrote on the wall his birth month, RIP, his name, and the day he thought he was going to die, etched it into the stone there on the wall. And finally, as a last gasp, kind of last desperate move, he decided that he had one of those little Leatherman tools, multi-purpose tools. He decided he was going to use that to amputate his own arm. And that was the only thing that was going to save him. Now, I'll spare you the gory details of that. It did end up saving his life. But I want to read to you the passage of when he finally got free from the rock after thinking that was going to kill him. He got free. He was able to walk out, find some other hikers on a different trail. They were able to helicopter him and get him rehydrated and fed. And he actually got a pickaxe attachment for his arm, so when he goes climbing, he still does the solo climbing and everything. But I want to read this to you about when he finally gets free so you can understand a little bit about what Jesus means by this. He says this, it's 11:32 a.m., Thursday, May 1st, 2003. For the second time in my life, I am being born. This time I'm being delivered from the canyon's pink womb where I have been incubating. This time I'm a grown adult and I understand the significance and power of this birth, as none of us can when it happens the first time. The value of my family, my friends, and my possessions well up in a heaping rush of energy like the burst I get approaching a hard-earned summit multiplied by 10,000. Pulling tight the remaining connective tissue to my arm, I rock the knife against the wall and the final thin strand of flesh tears loose. Tensile force rips the skin apart more than the blade cuts it. A crystalline moment shatters, and the world is a different place. Where there was confinement, now there is release. Recalling on my sudden liberation, my left arm flings down the canyon, opening up my shoulders to the south, and I fall back against the northern wall of the canyon. My mind is surfing on euphoria. I stare at the wall while not 12 hours ago I etched R.I.P. October 75, Aaron, April 03. A voice shatters in my head, I am free. I am free. And what I think he realized is what Jesus was trying to say in this passage. That cutting off his arm was a choice. It was a hard choice. But it was the only thing that saved him. He would have died in that canyon had he not freed himself from the thing that was killing him. And after losing his arm, which was traumatic, it wasn't near as traumatic as what it would have been like to die in that canyon. And so it goes with us. Cutting off our own disordered attachments, honestly, may feel awful, but it's the thing that makes us free. This leads us to a more cruciform version of our life, a more life closely aligned with who we want to be, who God has made us to be, and the story of Christ. So this morning, you have the invitation of God, and we usually say that invitation is for you to come forward and be baptized or have the prayers of one of our elders, and that's certainly appropriate now, but the invitation this morning is deeper than that. The invitation is for you to look with yourself, your family, and even in the community, your spiritual community, to find those things that are become disordered attachment and begin to find the ways to cut those things out of your life, to give God glory and honor and to help us be free. Let's stand together and worship God.